is CNN.
Hi everyone, CNN Weather Center, I'm Flip Spicer. Well, the warm temperatures across the central and northern plain states coming to an abrupt end. There is a cold front moving through there right now. You can see it here better on the end of the loop than at the beginning. Right there you can see it developing, and that's moving through and really lowering temperatures in places like Nebraska and Kansas, where yesterday we saw many 80-degree readings, record-setting highs. Tomorrow and their highs only in the 40s. So a real strong cold front pushing through. And as you might imagine, rainfall precedes it. Snowfall up across the Great Lakes area. There is another area of rainfall down here to the south. And light snow throughout much of the Rockies. There's some rainfall in the Rockies, too. In the west, nice weather. In the east, particularly the southeast, very nice weather again today. Temperatures well into the 70s in many places across the southeast today. But here's the rain and the cold front back in here. The blue is the snow. The pink is a mix of rain and snow. Snow is going to continue in the Great Lakes area. Lake effect snow could be heavy right near the lakes, but all in all, I don't think we're looking at a heavy snowfall out of this, maybe 2-3 inches as the cold front pushes down. Remember I told you about the rainfall in the Rockies? Here it is, some snowfall too. As we move on to our forecast weather map for later in the day, here's the cold front. It becomes a much more well-organized weather system overnight tonight and continues to push to the south and east, and all along this front we will see rainfall again tomorrow, widely scattered showers. There is the threat of some thunderstorm activity down here along the Gulf Coast as this area of low pressure moves across. However, you don't really have all the ingredients for severe thunderstorm activity. It's certainly warm enough, but it's not carrying much moisture. The air is quite dry, so as the cold front pushes into it, we'll go with rainfall. There's the snow in the Great Lakes area. Here's the snow expect to continue in the Rockies throughout the day and into the evening hours. The snowfall will continue in the Great Lakes area. Again, heavy lake effect snow. Other than that, just widely scattered snowfall. The front continues to push to the south and east. The south tomorrow, down here across the Carolinas and Georgia, we will see another warm day, but it cools off after that. Stay tuned for Inside Politics.
U.S. Commerce Secretary Ron Brown is missing and feared dead following the crash of his plane in Croatia. I'm Judy Woodruff in Washington. This is Inside Politics. Thanks for joining us. A grim search is underway in the area around Dubrovnik, Croatia. Members of the American military and the Croatian police are searching for the wreckage of the U.S. Air Force plane, which was carrying U.S. Commerce Secretary Ron Brown and a group of business executives. The aircraft disappeared in stormy weather about 8 hours ago during a flight from Tuzla in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Croatia's president tells CNN the plane crashed into a hill about 10 miles southeast of Dubrovnik. Brown was in the Balkans on a business development trip, accompanied by top representatives of the U.S. tourism and telecommunications industries. Our Claire Shipman joins us now from the White House for the latest on Clinton administration reaction. Claire.
Judy, good afternoon. We're told that President Clinton at this point is on his way to the Commerce Department, that he will have some sort of statement to make, and so we could learn more right away about Ron Brown's fate. But behind the scenes, officials are saying it's extremely unlikely that there are any survivors in this crash. Now, Brown was in Tuzla just this morning. He was meeting with some of the U.S. troops there, sharing a meal with some of them before he got on that flight to Dubrovnik. And what we're told was some extremely bad, extremely windy weather. Now, President Clinton got the word early this morning that the plane was missing. This afternoon, he and the First Lady went to the Browns' home in the district to visit Mrs. Brown. Senator Ted Kennedy was also there earlier in the day paying his respects. In fact, there was quite a pilgrimage to the Brown home today. U.S. Trade Representative Mickey Kantor was there, as well as D.C. congressional delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton. Now, the only statement from the family so far comes from the Brown son, who a couple of hours ago was still expressing some optimism that his father might have survived.
Thank everyone who's called in, who's faxed us. Thank you very much for your well wishes. We're still very hopeful, but we are pessimistically optimistic. And we will give you further word later. Thank you very much. And again, thank you very much, everyone, for your well wishes. And we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Judy, it goes without saying that everyone here at the White House, from the president on down, is extremely distraught, trying to sort through a lot of conflicting reports about what happened. And we will be bringing you the president's remarks live.
All right, Claire Shipman at the White House. Thanks. The Pentagon has been a clearinghouse for information about this developing story. CNN's Carl Rochelle is standing by with the latest information from there. Carl.
Judy, what we expect here is once the president is finished over at the Commerce Department, we expect the president
we expect a briefing here at the Pentagon from a member of the Joint Staff to give us what information they have about what happened, what they know that happened with the crash scene. The search for the aircraft is going on, search for details about the aircraft going on right now. This T-43, it's a 737, a military model of the 737. We were told it was acquired by the Air Force in 1988. It had no trouble with it, went through inspection and repair in 1995. In June of 1995, it was inspected and repaired and put back in first-class shape. It was the plane that was being used by Defense Secretary William Perry. And we are told, we asked the question if this is the airplane that Hillary Clinton flew on when the First Lady was over in that area, and we were told it's the only T-43 in the area, so our assumption is that, yes, that is the one that the First Lady flew on also. They're trying to actually confirm that, but that is about as much as they know right now. Again, the search is underway. The big thing is to get U.S. personnel into the area so they can give witness to the evidence that has been found. We have reports of at least 4 bodies being found on the land, and parts of the airplane on the land, parts of the airplane in the water. I have taken a look at some of the approach plates for the area, and they do show that there are mountains in the area that are higher than some of the initial approach altitudes that the aircraft would be going into when it was coming into the airport there. Judy?
All right, Carl Rochelle at the Pentagon, and we want to take you now to the Commerce Department, where, as you can see, many of the employees of this huge department are waiting for President Clinton to arrive to speak to these people who've worked with Secretary Brown for 3.5 years. I'm told that there are some 35,000 employees at the Commerce Department. We don't know. I don't know how many of those are based here in Washington, but this is very much a fixture of this administration. We're told there are about 1,000 people in the room. I can't make out who some of the individuals are who you see standing there on the stage where the president will be in just a moment. As you've been hearing throughout the morning and the early afternoon, Ron Brown was someone who was very close to Bill Clinton. He was intimately involved in the Clinton campaign as chairman of the Democratic Party during 1992. He was someone who the president, then Governor Clinton, relied on for advice. As you saw earlier, Senator Edward Kennedy visited the Brown home today. He worked for Senator Kennedy not only in his staff at the Senate, but also was involved in his campaign for president in 1980. Kwasi Mfume, former Congressman Kwasi Mfume from the state of Maryland, who is now head of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, joins us now from Los Angeles. Congressman, you got to know Ron Brown in the late 1980s. What are your main memories of this man?
Well, first of all, I should say that most of us are still hoping against hope that things work out and that Ron and the others on that plane are found and are found alive. If that is not God's will, and if things appear to be as they are unfolding, our hearts go out to Alma and to Michael, to other members of the Brown family who we've known and worked with and loved for years. I met Ron in 1980 during Senator Kennedy's campaign. We were both very much involved in that. Got to know him through the 1980s, through the Jackson campaign, and even more so when he ran the Democratic National Committee, which evidenced itself, at least his work, in the election of President Clinton. I think one thing we have to say about Ron Brown is that he was a true patriot, one who was a good partisan, but one who could also bring people together, and had a knack for taking the corporate community and the activist community and showing them how they were both tied together and why their ability to work together would make so much of a difference for the ability of this nation to succeed.
Yes, we're talking with Kwasi Mfume, president of the NAACP, and we want to say we're now able to get a better look at who these people are. It is the bulk of the Clinton cabinet. Attorney General Janet Reno, Agriculture Secretary Dan Glickman, HUD Secretary, Housing and Urban Development Secretary Henry Cisneros, Donna Shalala, who's the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Secretary Riley of the Education Department, a collection of some of the leaders of the Clinton administration. We are told that some of the people you see standing here are top officials in the Commerce Department, presumably who worked right under Ron Brown. Secretary Babbitt of the Interior Department, and several other familiar faces. Mr. Mfume, what drove Ron Brown? What drives Ron Brown? And I appreciate your correcting me a moment ago. We have to be careful not to slip into the past tense because we don't know with any finality or certainty his fate. We do know the plane is down. We know that it does not look good, but we want to be very careful not to presume anything until we have final confirmation. What is it that drives this man whom you've known for a number of years?
Ron is a true believer. He believes in people, he believes in the power of ideas, believes in the will, believes in God's plan for all of us, despite our own differences, to find ourselves eventually. And he believed in himself. He had the ability to walk into a room of people who were not believers, who perhaps had a different point of view altogether, and infect them with this tremendous amount of optimism for the future and his love for this country and his willingness to make things work. It's one of the things about Ron that most of us who have known him over the years have come to know, love, and appreciate.
What was it about politics and Ron Brown? This is something he was attracted to almost from the beginning. He, I guess, shortly after he graduated from law school, he got involved in politics.
Well, he did. He not only got involved and he won. I mean, even when he was involved with a campaign that wasn't successful, as we all were with the Kennedy campaign in 1980 or the Jackson campaign later in that decade, Ron had a way of winning anyway. He won the hearts and the minds of people who started believing again that their role was to make the system work and that in spite of the impediments that they had really a role to play. That kind of belief that carried over into politics evidenced itself over and over again. He had a pure passion for it. He was clearly, to the best of his credit, was a true partisan, but he was also a true patriot who believed that unless we as a nation found ourselves, perhaps we would lose ourselves in the political process.
Mr. Mfume, we're going to pause here because President Clinton, First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton have come into the auditorium at the Commerce Department. Let's listen to this.
To all of my colleagues in the Department of Commerce, I'd like to introduce to you the United States President, President Clinton.
Thank you. Please be seated. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Good. Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President and the First Lady and the members of Cabinet and I wanted to come here to be with the employees of the Commerce Department at this very difficult hour. Hillary and I have just come from Ron Brown's home, visiting with Alma and Michael and their family and friends who are there. And we wanted to come and spend a few moments with you. As all of you know, the plane carrying Secretary Brown and his delegation, including a number of your colleagues, business leaders, and members of the United States military, went down today near Dubrovnik in Croatia. We do not know for sure what happened there. But I wanted to come here today. It is almost Passover for American Jews, and I know a lot of you will want to be leaving soon, just to have the chance to say a few words to you. First thing I want to say is, before I left, I asked Alma, I said, Alma, what do you want me to say when I go to the Commerce Department? She said, tell them Ron was proud of them, that he liked them, that he believed in them, and that he fought for the Commerce Department, and tell them that you're going to do that now, which I thought was an incredible thing. You know, I've known Ron Brown a long time. I was always amazed at the way he was continually reaching out, trying to bridge the differences between people, always trying to get the best out of people, always believing that we could do more than we have done. In a way, that this job was sort of ready-made for him at this moment in history, and he loved it very much. Most of the time Ron Brown spent using the power of the Commerce Department to find ways to give opportunity to ordinary Americans, to generate jobs for the American economy and build better futures for American citizens. But when we met earlier this week, right before he left for the Balkans, he was so excited because he thought that along with these business leaders and the other very able people from the Commerce Department on this mission, that they would be able to use the power of the American economy to help the peace take hold in the Balkans, to help people in that troubled place have the kind of decent, honorable, and wonderfully ordinary lives that we Americans too often take for granted. And he was so excited by it. If you saw any of the clips on the television that have been showing today about his meetings yesterday, you could see that. And I just want to say on a very personal note that I hope all Americans today will be grateful for what all the people who were on that plane did, for the military personnel, for the business leaders who didn't have to go on that mission, who did it not out of a sense of their own profit, but out of a sense of what they could do to help America bring peace. All the wonderful people in the Commerce Department that were on that plane, some of them very young. One of them who came to our campaign in 1992 thinking the most important thing he could do was to ride a bicycle across the country asking people to vote for the vice president and me. Wound up a trusted employee at the Commerce Department. And to all of their loved ones and their families and their friends, I want to say I am very grateful for their lives and their service. I also want to say just one last thing about Ron Brown. He was one of the best advisors and ablest people I ever knew. And he was very, very good at everything he ever did. Whether he was the Commerce Secretary or a civil rights leader or something else, he was always out there just giving it his all. And he always believed that his mission in life was to put people's dreams within their reach if they were willing to work for it and believe in themselves. When we were over at his home a few moments ago, Alexis Herman, who, as many of you know, used to work with Ron at the Democratic Committee, and they've been friends a long time, told me that his favorite scripture verse was that wonderful verse from Isaiah, "They who wait upon the Lord shall have their strength renewed. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and faint not." Well, Ron Brown walked and ran and flew through life. And he was a magnificent life force. And those of us who loved him will always be grateful for his friendship and his warmth. But every American should be grateful that at a very difficult moment in our nation's history, he made this Commerce Department what it was meant to be, an instrument for realizing the potential of every American. For all of you who played a role in that, I ask for your prayers for Secretary Brown and his family, for your colleagues and their families, for the business leaders and their families, and for our beloved military officers and their families. And I ask you always, always to be fiercely proud for what you have done and very grateful for the opportunity to have done it. I'd like to ask now that we bow for a moment of silence. Amen. Thank you.
President and Mrs. Clinton, Vice President Gore, and the new acting Secretary of Commerce. Her name is Good, and a host of other members of the Clinton cabinet. They're expressing their grief and sorrow at the news today that the plane carrying Commerce Secretary Ron Brown is down, has crashed in Croatia. There is no certain word on the fate of Secretary Brown and of the other commerce officials, business leaders who were on the plane, and military personnel who the president just mentioned. And he asked the group there, about 1,000 people assembled in the auditorium at the Commerce Department here in Washington, to pray for those who were on board that flight. CNN's Jean Meserve has looked at the personal and the professional journey that brought Ron Brown to the corridors of power here in Washington.
Harlem was home for Ron Brown. His father managed a hotel right across the street from the famed Apollo Theater. But Brown spent much of his life in white environments, pushing open doors that had been shut to African Americans. His college roommate recalls how Brown integrated the fraternity system at Middlebury in Vermont.
And it was before the big civil rights movements where people focused on it. So in looking back at it, we're pleased with it.
He was the first black partner at the Washington law firm of Patton, Boggs & Blow, and the first black to lead the Democratic National Committee.
I thought an African American could not run the DNC. The country was not ready for it. Ron made the country ready for his bridge-building, reconciling way of organizing things and people. And against the great odds, the Democrats won in large measure because of Ron Brown's bridge building.
Brown cut his political teeth at the National Urban League.
He really put the National Urban League on the cutting edge of policy issues that were before the Congress.
He worked on the staff and on the 1980 presidential campaign of Senator Edward Kennedy. And in 1988, he was a top player in Jesse Jackson's bid for the presidency. He fought long odds to become chairman of the Democratic National Committee, but in the end was given a large measure of the credit for Bill Clinton's 1992 victory. Brown was rewarded with the post of Commerce Secretary. He fought successfully for the North American Free Trade Agreement and traveled often and far on the hunt for overseas business.
The bottom line is U.S. exports equals U.S. jobs.
But Brown was hauled before congressional committees on allegations of financial impropriety.
The statement that I made was an absolute, total, unequivocal denial of a preposterous and ridiculous allegation.
Brown was cleared of one set of allegations. Another investigation is ongoing. At the 1992 Democratic Convention, Ron Brown reflected on his accomplishments.
You gave me the chance to demonstrate what my mother and my father always taught me to believe, that in America, a kid from Harlem can go anywhere, do anything.
This kid from Harlem certainly has. Jean Meserve, CNN, Washington.
Joining us once again, Kwesi Mfume, the former Maryland Democratic congressman, now president of the NAACP. Mr. Mfume, you talked a moment ago about Ron Brown, the person, I think you used the word life force in him. What sort of personality are we talking about here?
We're talking about a personality that would not be denied, that recognized at an early age his true potential because of all of the nameless and faceless people that were a part of his life that cared so much about him, who grew up pretty much in a segregated system like many of us did, but who did not allow that to take him and move him somewhere else. Ron was constantly moving himself. And when the president talked about how he walked, ran, and flew through life, that's a pretty accurate decision. His ability to positively affect the lives of other people and to create within the hearts of other people a desire to want to do more and to be more and to bring together all the diverse elements of this country is phenomenal. That is what people remember most about Ron, and his warmth, his passion, his humor, but most of all, a spirit that would not be denied.
Jack Germond was reminding me a moment ago that Ron Brown originally wanted Mario Cuomo to run for president in 1992, but then, of course, he came over to support Bill Clinton. Was that a hard thing for him to do, an easy thing for him to do, or what?
I don't think it was hard. What was hard about that particular campaign was the reluctance prior to the campaign for people in this country, and indeed within the Democratic Party, to accept Ron Brown as the head of the Democratic National Committee. It was a first, and while people were not questioning his credentials, they found other things to question. I had a talk with him once just outside of the floor of Congress and watched the real pain in his heart, why he was running into this sort of a wall. He had done all he did. He played by the rules. He fought hard. He loved his country. He cherished his faith. He'd worked his way up through the ranks, and he had the belief and the right to believe that if he were able to get this job, then others within the party and outside of the party should embrace him. And when that embracing finally took place, it was interesting that Ron Brown never held a grudge against anyone, never called in a partisanship to make it tough for anybody. He worked even harder then and reached out even more to bring our party back together.
I mentioned Jack Germond just a moment ago. He's joining us now here in the studio in Washington. Jack, you were talking to me a little while ago about the role Ron Brown played in getting Bill Clinton elected president, and you had a conversation with Bill Clinton about that at one point.
Well, I certainly remember the president saying in a sort of off-the-record situation that wasn't particularly newsworthy at the time, that Ron Brown had done as much as anyone, or perhaps more than anyone else, to see to his election in 1992. And I think that is true. I think you can make a case that Brown had more to do with the Democrats coming out of the wilderness and getting the White House back. I can remember Brown had this boundless optimism, and Ron would say, and this goes back to the worst days, 1991, of the Democratic Party, and Bush looked so strong, and Brown would say, I think George Bush is a loser. I think we can beat him. And he acted on that optimism. They built a big war chest for the candidate. They built an organization for the candidate. They went ahead as if they were going to win, and did win.
Kwesi Mfume, was he that optimistic, or was he trying to get everybody hopeful and stirred up and working harder?
I think it was both, Judy. He definitely had the optimism and carried it throughout his life in everything he did, whether it was his law practice or his work with the Urban League or his work with the party. But he also knew that in order to get people to believe, you had to give them something to believe in, and that people would judge you not by your rhetoric, but by your action. And so Jack was right. He went out, he raised money, he put together a campaign, he put together candidates. He started giving people something to believe in. And I guess in the end, and at the end of the day, a lot of doubters said either Ron Brown is crazy or I ought to be believing what he's believing in. And things changed miraculously in that year. We saw what happened to former President Bush in the polls, and we saw how the Democratic Party found itself and found its heart. It did so in large part because of Ron Brown.
Jack Germond, to you again. What was his style when he was talking to people, trying to persuade them to do something that he thought they should do?
Well, I mean, Ron, first of all, was always optimistic and positive, a man of extraordinary charm, ingratiating, and very focused. I mean, one of the things that was true about him that seemed strange when you realize how articulate he was, is that he would, for example, rehearse speeches to groups of party functionaries. You wouldn't think that was necessary, and it probably wasn't, but he didn't want to make the mistake of speaking down to them. So he was always prepared. He was always intense. You know, the things he did for in getting the party ready for '92 meant that when Clinton was nominated, he had in place an organization and money for the party that other candidates usually had to raise and put in place after the nominating convention. That made a tremendous difference in 1992.
So people talk a lot about his personal skills, but it was also his organizational skills that stood out?
Well, they went together, Judy. People would, I mean, people liked Ron. They would work for him.
I'm reminded by our Executive Vice President, Bob Fernand, we're not supposed to be using the word was and anything in the past tense, because it is the case that we do not know the fate of Ron Brown. We did hear the President Clinton a moment ago speaking in the past tense, but we want to resist that temptation. We want to go now to the Pentagon, where Lieutenant General Howell Estes, who is with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is briefing. We are told he's going to brief reporters on the status of the Brown plane investigation. Let's listen.
This is obviously not a very pleasant experience or time for any of us to be able to have to get up and talk about such a tragic accident as happened today with Secretary Brown's aircraft. What I want to do for you today, since there have been a lot of rumors out there and a lot of speculation about what occurred, is to try to give you the facts as we know them. Now, needless to say, this happened in a very remote area in terms of the location of U.S. people and support that can be provided if something happened like this tragic accident. And so the flow of information has been a little difficult, but the worst thing that I can do for you all today is to get up and not state what we know as fact. And so I will try to stick to that. And to do that, I'm going to use some notes and a few charts so that I accurately depict the information that we have available at this time. Secretary Brown's aircraft was scheduled to take off from Tuzla in Bosnia at about 7 o'clock Eastern Time this morning and proceed on a route of flight down to Dubrovnik in Croatia for landing. It was about a 45-minute flight, so they should have been on the ground there at about 7:45 to 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time this morning. The weather down at Dubrovnik this morning was not very good, and so as the aircraft proceeded to the south, they were required to make what we call an instrument approach into the airfield. The aircraft was on the instrument approach, was in contact with a tower at the Dubrovnik airport when contact was lost. Initial reports that we received and that we received in Europe were that there was wreckage sighted in the waters of the Adriatic. A search and rescue mission was launched initially from the U.S. involving U.S. Special Forces, which the closest place we had people that could respond to this were Italy with the kinds of equipment necessary. They were over at Brindisi, Italy, but we deployed what we call an MC-130 aircraft. It's a Special Forces kind of an aircraft, a 4-engine propeller-driven aircraft, and helicopters. The MH-53 helicopter, a fairly large helicopter used by Special Forces, and they were conducting the search and rescue. They initially concentrated, I should also add, helicopters from other nations were involved as well, not just U.S. in this initial search. All of these aircraft initially concentrated on the areas that were initially reported, which were that there was wreckage at sea. No wreckage was found at sea by any of the search and rescue assets. About 3 hours into the search, and you've got to remember now, the weather is bad, reasonably bad, requiring an instrument approach. So as I will show you in a minute, there are, in fact, some hills in the area around the airport to the north side of the runway, a reasonable amount of distance, but nevertheless there. And the fact is that we had some reports from the Croatians that they had found a crash site up on the side of the hill, covered by the clouds. So it was obviously not easy to see, not easy to determine that there was in fact a crash site there, but they initially reported a crash site of an aircraft about 3 kilometers to the north of the western end of the runway. The crash site has been reached by Croatian police, and I've just received word that there's also a Croatian doctor on the scene. U.S. forces are striving to get to the scene. In fact, at this minute, may be at the scene. There are helicopters on the ground at Dubrovnik's airport, U.S. helicopters that held about 50 U.S. personnel. Initially, they made an attempt to land at the crash site, but because of the weather, were unable to do that. And so they are, as rapidly as possible, working their way up to where the crash site is. This is important because there have been unconfirmed by anybody in the U.S. side reports that there have been some casualties on the ground, obviously, but there are unconfirmed, and I want to stress, unconfirmed reports of a survivor on the ground. And so it's extremely important that every effort be made to get help up to the scene, and that's why I go through this about who is there now. We're being told that there is a Croatian doctor there, and these U.S. personnel, of which we have some people with medical experience, although not doctors at this stage of the game, also headed up there to provide whatever assistance they can to the Croatians. Obviously, the Croatian government has asked for assistance in the search and rescue. As I mentioned, we already have forces on the ground. The U.S. on-scene commander is a Brigadier General Mike Canavan. He is physically present at the airport now. There is a team being assembled up at Tuzla in Bosnia to provide additional assistance as required. And the normal things when you have an aircraft accident of this time, such as communications, security, public affairs, and mortuary affairs, people are going to be brought down initially to Split in Croatia and then drive down to the crash site. Are going to Split instead of Dubrovnik. At least initial reports are they're going to do that because they want to be sure they can get in with the weather situation the way it is. I might also point out that an accident board has been appointed by the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. The accident board president will be Brigadier General Charlie Coolidge. He is presently here in the United States. Will leave the U.S. tonight for Croatia. The National Transportation Safety Board has also agreed to provide assistance in this accident investigation. Initially, 4 members of the NTSB will be with the Air Force team and serve as advisors. I think it's important to point out at this point there is no evidence of any hostile fire in the area. There is no evidence of any kind of an explosion aboard the aircraft. I think at this point, because of the location, we would rule anything out of that type. Obviously, General Coolidge and his team will do everything humanly possible to determine the cause of this accident, and will make a full report. One thing I think it's also worth mentioning in terms of the manifest, I know there is concern for numbers of people aboard, families obviously very concerned, and we here in the Defense Department have made every effort to try to confirm the people who were aboard the aircraft. The report that we have is that there were 33 people aboard, 27 passengers and a crew of 6. I think with that as an opening, I will turn to these slides again and try to give you a little more definition on the crash site itself as it's being told to us by the Croatians. I don't know if you can see that with the cameras in the back. Let me turn this just a little bit more, and maybe that'd be of help. This is a rendition of what the area around Dubrovnik looks like with the Adriatic Sea out here. City of Dubrovnik shown in this area. The airport itself is located on this piece of land. You can see the runway here. The crash site is up on this hillside that you see here. Why don't I get through this and then we'll take questions, okay? Next slide, please. I'll show you one other view of it. Go ahead, I've got it. This is now looking out from the water. You can see the runway structure here. This being the west end of the runway, headed east. And the crash site that is now being approached is up here on this hill. This hill is about 2,300 feet tall. To the west and to the north side of the airport about 3 miles. 2,300 feet. It's about, I said 3 miles, it's 3 kilometers. 3 kilometers, about 1.8 miles to the north-northwest. One other slide to talk a little bit about the aircraft itself. The aircraft is what the Air Force calls a T-43 aircraft. Many of you will recognize this as a Boeing 737, very similar to the commercial version. Some of the specifics, the aircraft is located at Ramstein Air Force Base. That's where it is based. I've already told you the size of the crew, and there are just some other facts about it here that talk to its range and its speed and so forth. But this is an aircraft very familiar to all of you and to those watching on television, in that it's a commercial airliner used for a long period of time in this country with a very, very good safety record. As I mentioned, General Coolidge will be doing the accident investigation, and when he determines the facts surrounding this accident, he will report them to the proper authorities that he is to report to. I can only say that here in the Defense Department, in the Joint Staff, in the Air Force, throughout this building, there's a great amount of concern for the individuals who are aboard the aircraft, obviously their families, and we are doing everything we can here to assist the Croatians as they carry out the actions that need to be taken at the crash site. We can only hope that reports of survivors are true and that more are found, and we will be making information available to you as it becomes available to us. If I could start here.
General, do you have any reports of confirmed fatalities? You told us of the unconfirmed reported
We have
survivors.
no confirmed reports of either fatalities or survivors. I can only put it that way because I have unconfirmed reports of some fatalities and 1 survivor, unconfirmed.
Yes, General, a lot of questions dealing with the same thing, and forgive me for getting a little technical for some of my brethren here, but going through the approach for a moment, I'm interested in length of runway. Was there ILS there? Was he on the approach and veered off? Was he landing to the east or west? Was there a black box aboard? Was there a wind shear detector aboard? Any evidence of wind shear in the area? Things of that.
Yeah. Well, I think many of the questions you're asking really need to come out in the accident investigation. But in general terms, I do know that the airport was serviced by a radio beacon. That was what was being used for the approach. It is a well-known system for doing instrument approaches. The runway length was not a problem. They've got plenty of runway there. The runway direction is in a heading of 300 to the northwest and to the southeast on 120. They were landing to the southeast, so they were coming from west to east. And from the slide I showed you earlier, let's just put that back up, the one with the water view. No, the other one.
That's the question. Was it sort of on the approach when he went in, or after he veered off, or had gone past the airfield, or can you tell?
Just 1 minute. Let's get this up so everybody can see what I'm going to describe here. Here is the runway structure out here. The aircraft approach would have been from this direction. Okay, we're to the west side toward Dubrovnik. We're heading to the southeast and landing in the direction of 120, okay? So they would have approached over water here and come in on about a heading like that in the approach.
General, there were reports that a senior general was on board. Is that the case, and who was that?
Again, it's difficult for me to confirm or deny these reports at this point in time. When we have information that confirms who was on the aircraft, as the rescue teams get to the crash site and make that determination, it'll be made available to you, I'm sure. I don't have any information for it.
From the aircraft about the stress or anything?
No, I think that's an important point, Carl. There were no calls made indicating any kind of a problem aboard the aircraft. It appeared to be a routine approach from what I know at this point in time.
At what point did you lose contact with the aircraft? Where were they in the approach?
Yeah. Again, I can't tell you that. I don't have the information. I know that they were in contact with the tower, making their approach when contact was lost. I can't tell you in what phase they were in because we don't know that at this point in time.
And do you have any idea what the
Let me go over here to
timetable
Mark.
is for the Americans to get up to the site?
Well, as I said, and I just was handed a note, let me, yeah, this just says General Canavan is there. I've already told you he's there on the ground. They couldn't get in by helicopter. They're proceeding up now afoot. And I can't give you an exact time they're going to reach the crash site. They could be there at this very minute.
Yeah, we can.
I just don't have that kind of contact with them since I've come down here. I can't tell you where they are right this minute. Let me just make it very clear.
We are listening to Lieutenant General Howell Estes with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who's been briefing reporters at the Pentagon on the status at this point of the investigation of the plane crash in Croatia, where the plane on which Secretary of Commerce Ron Brown and 31 other people were. They were flying from Tuzla in Bosnia-Herzegovina to Dubrovnik. General Estes just said, we heard just a moment ago, said there are no confirmed reports yet of either casualties or survivors, but he did say that there is at least one unconfirmed report of a survivor, and at this point we see that the Reuters news service is saying that a Croatian official over in Croatia is saying that there are reports of a woman survivor, and they are doing everything they possibly can to keep her alive. Once again, back to what General Estes had to say. He said the plane was making an approach. It was going from west to east. The weather was bad. He didn't know how far the plane was from the airport. No, I'm sorry. He did say that it was within a matter of miles from the airport when suddenly contact was lost with the airplane. Let's go back and listen to more of what General Estes is telling reporters at the Pentagon.
And for each category, the weather minimums may be different depending on the kind of aircraft.
My question is, are your Air Force minimums any different than those that would typically apply in commercial air service?
No, not for this kind of an aircraft. They wouldn't be any different. In other words, you're asking me, would they be lower? The answer would be no.
Lower, higher?
They could be higher, but they wouldn't be lower than the published minimums for the approach used by civilian aircraft.
General, there's a rumor that there was a suggestion that this flight be grounded and that the order was overruled and it went anyway.
Yeah. You're dealing with a rumor again. I can't speculate. I have not heard that. It will be looked at by the accident board as part of their investigation.
Well, General Estes, you said earlier, if I understood right, that U.S. helicopters tried to land at the crash site, but they couldn't.
That's right.
And so essentially now, if General Canavan's team is arriving, this is the first time that U.S. personnel are arriving at the crash site?
At the crash site itself, that's right. Now, remember, what I've described is General Canavan is at the airport, okay? And that's what we're talking about down here. The distance they have to travel is up to where the crash site is. We're talking going through very rough terrain, and there are no roads to where the crash site is. So they're having to work their way up there. Weather is still not good up here. It's cloud covered. In fact, right down on the top of the mountain. So it will take them some time to get there. But there are people on the scene, and as I described to you earlier, for all I know, they may be at the scene by now.
General, why the problem with the...
Let me go back here first.
General, the civilian aviation charts for this area indicate that the only instrument approach is either basically straight from Dubrovnik into the airport, or looping even farther to the south. Is there any indication from the controllers who were talking to these guys in the air why they were apparently so far off of any instrument approach course?
Yes, no, I can't answer that question for you. What you're describing is that there are two approaches. There is a straight-in approach, like this, or a circling approach that would take you out this direction away from the mountains. And those are two kinds of approaches off the same kind of an instrument landing that would be done using the instrumentation available at the airport. I can't tell you why they were where they were, nor am I in a position to speculate. That's exactly what General Coolidge and the accident board will attempt to determine.
Well, General, if I can just follow up, sir, were there any reasons why for security approaches that they would take a non-standard approach?
Absolutely not. No, I mean I can't imagine when these aircraft, we in the Air Force would fly it like you would fly a commercial airliner. I mean, it wouldn't be any different. It would be unthinkable that they would be flying an approach different than what was published. What would they be flying? They have to be flying the published approach. So we don't even need to speculate on that. They wouldn't be doing something non-standard to get into the airport.
But are you saying but they were off, are you saying though that you think they were off that course?
I haven't a clue why they ended up here.
I mean, when they, you think they were? Is that...
Well, what I'm telling you is they were on approach to this runway. The aircraft impacted on the hill here. The accident board will determine why this chain of events happened. That's all I can tell you. Yes, sir.
When did Secretary Brown get to Tuzla? And two, have you gotten a manifest from Tuzla?
What I'm going to do on this is I'm going to stick to the operational details, the specifics of when Secretary Brown arrived at Tuzla. The manifest issue will have to be dealt with by the State Department, and I think they're prepared to address that later.
General, was there
Let me go back here where I haven't had a question.
This essentially is a dedicated passenger jet for USAFE. Do you have a sense in the last month how often it flew? They must not have much demand there for a plane this large ferrying people around. What about crew proficiency? How come this wasn't the 89th?
Yeah. Well, this is an airplane which is used extensively in Europe. I'm very familiar with the utilization of the aircraft. There are teams that move around. It supports not just Air Force, but other people as well. So it gets good utilization. In fact, this particular aircraft had about 17,000 flying hours. That particular aircraft did. It had, in terms of 737s of a similar age, they're up to between 30 and 50,000 hours. So it wasn't a high-time aircraft. Airplane had been through a full inspection, full maintenance inspection in June of '95. A total maintenance inspection has had a series of them since then. But the aircraft's been used in Europe routinely, and this is not an issue of crew, I do not believe. Okay, now this is, again, I promised I wouldn't speculate, but knowing how these aircraft are operated, I can't believe that that lack of flying would be a problem with this aircraft.
Explain why it isn't the 89th, the people who think that high officials always fly with the 89th SAM out of Andrews, how come they weren't involved here and it was a USAFE asset?
Yeah, I can't tell you why that's the case. The 89th does the long-distance haul for dignitaries of Secretary Brown, like Secretary Brown, a cabinet member, and a party that he had with him. But in terms of making the shorter flights that they are making into places like Tuzla and some of the other stops they were making, it was obviously determined this was a better aircraft to do it with. Yes, sir.
Any information as to whether this crew had flown into Dubrovnik prior to this flight?
I'm sorry, sir, I can't give you the answer.
General, what direction was the plane? Do we know estimated time of impact to the estimated time of when the first Croatian, whoever that might have been, arrived? Do you know?
Again, I don't have the specifics of that yet. We will get that, but we just, we're talking an awful long distance away. I wish I could tell you exactly what happened and what the sequence of events were in terms of people arriving on the scene. The information just is not available yet. And right now, our primary concern is getting rescue people up there to assist any survivors.
General, was this plane carrying a flight data recorder or a cockpit voice recorder that will help you figure out what happened?
Yeah, it'd be a standard thing to have that in this type of an aircraft. I think you can assume that sort of thing, a flight data recorder, a cockpit voice recorder, as there are in commercial airliners, also is in this aircraft.
A ground proximity warning system, was that on?
I can't tell you that for sure.
What direction was the plane flying? And you've told us where the crash site was, but what was its direction at the time it landed? Can you tell us that?
I have no idea. I just don't know yet.
Your report told us earlier that it did not have a CVR or an FDR on this. It did not.
Then I have got to, I've got to back off and say if the Air Force has already told you that, it's their aircraft.
Which begs the question, why not?
Well, you're asking me, unfortunately, questions I can't answer.
Report of the survivor, do you have any other details at all as to whether it was a man or woman or a passenger or crew?
Yeah. I don't, and I don't want to speculate at this time, and again, because it's an unconfirmed report. I wish I could confirm this were true, but I can't do it standing here today. We just don't have that kind of information. I have given you everything that I know of in terms of unconfirmed reports because you have a right to know what we are hearing as unconfirmed reports. As soon as these things can be confirmed, it'll be made available to you.
Perhaps you could just clear up. Looking at your command pilot wings, commercial 737s have been having some problems, a couple of crashes last year. Engine failure and/or a jamming of an elevator could throw an aircraft off even that distance. If you say that you're pretty convinced that it's not pilot error, that leaves two things, act of God or mechanical error.
Right.
What's your feeling?
Well, you're asking me to speculate. Don't misread me. I'm not saying it wasn't pilot error. I don't know what it was. That's not my job to stand here a very short time after the accident and try to speculate. It's a big mistake to do that. That's what an accident board is designed to do. Let's wait and see what they come up with.
Do you expect to be able to get search and rescue personnel there tonight?
Absolutely. I think that's a distinct possibility. And if it, like I said, it may have happened by now. As soon as we get confirmation, we'll give you updates as we go through the rest of the afternoon.
Have you had problems with the T-43?
We take one more back here.
Have you had problems with the T-43 before, similar to the commercial 737?
Yeah. I don't want to speculate on that because if we have, I personally am unaware of it. I think if there were anything, me being in the position that I'm in and operations in the Joint Staff, I would have been aware of it. But I know of no problems, no reports of any problems with the T-43 aircraft. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're listening to Lieutenant General Howell Estes with the Joint Chiefs of Staff talking to reporters at the Pentagon, giving as much information as he says he's able to provide at this hour. Just a brief recap, 33 people on board the military version of a Boeing 737. It's called a T-43A. We just heard General Estes say he couldn't believe that lack of experience on the part of the crew would have been a factor, but then he went on to say, you know, I'm not in a position, I'm quoting here now, he said, I'm not convinced that it's not pilot error, pilot failure. He described the weather conditions, said they were very bad, said the plane was on approach, going from west to east into a hilly area close to Dubrovnik in Croatia at about 7:45 this morning Eastern time in the United States when suddenly contact with the plane was lost. He said we know that the plane was making an approach, but then upon questioning by reporters, General Estes said he couldn't explain why the plane was as far away as it was from the airport if it were making an approach. And he said at that point, it's pure speculation. He said typically a plane would come in and he used a pointer to look at a map and said it would have come directly into the runway or it could have circled out over the water. He couldn't explain why the plane crash had occurred, why the plane was over a hilly area. Once again, he said there were no confirmed reports that he could make of either survivors or casualties. But it's pretty clear from all evidence that if there are survivors, there are not many of them. There is a report, which General Estes repeated, that an unconfirmed report of a survivor. Reuters is saying it is a woman survivor, and officials there are saying they're doing all they can to keep her alive. Once again, I'm Judy Woodruff in Washington. CNN will continue to bring you as much information as we can as soon as we get it on the aircraft that went down with U.S. Secretary of Commerce Ron Brown. We'll take a break now. Early Prime coming up next.